July 28, 1809. The hills outside Talavera, Spain. 20,000 British soldiers faced an impossible situation. Abandoned by their Spanish allies, outnumbered 2-1 by Napoleon's veterans, and fighting under a general still proving himself worthy of the name that would become legend. Behind them lay the brilliant river crossing at Oporto, where Wellington had dined on Marshals' salt's abandoned breakfast. Ahead marched 46,000 French troops in massive columns, screaming war cries that had terrorized Europe for over a decade. Between certain destruction and lasting glory stood the thin red line that would define British military doctrine for the next century. Sir Arthur Wellesley, not yet the Iron Duke, watched French artillery tear gaps in his formations, while Spanish troops fled from the sound of their own muskets. Everything he had learned in India, every tactical innovation he had developed, would be tested in the next few hours against Napoleon's finest. This is the story of Talavera, where British discipline conquered French fury, where the line proved superior to the column, and where Wellington earned his first great victory against impossible odds. It's the battle that transformed a Sepoy General into Europe's most dangerous enemy. The strategic situation that brought Wellington to Talavera began with his masterstroke at Oporto 3 months earlier. His audacious river crossing using wine barges had driven Marshals' salt from northern Portugal in complete disarray, proving that French armies could be surprised, defeated, and scattered by competent British leadership. Fresh from this triumph, Wellington saw an opportunity to strike deeper into French-controlled territory. Intelligence suggested that French forces in Spain were scattered and vulnerable to a coordinated attack. The plan was ambitious: advance into Spain, link up with Spanish forces under General Cuesta, and march on Madrid itself. The political stakes were enormous. Britain's commitment to the Peninsular Campaign faced constant criticism in Parliament, where many questioned the wisdom of continental intervention. A successful advance on the French capital would silence critics while demonstrating British resolve to Spanish and Portuguese populations suffering under French occupation. Wellington's army that crossed into Spain represented the finest professional force Britain had fielded since Marlborough's campaigns. These weren't raw recruits, but seasoned soldiers who had proven themselves in the demanding conditions of Portuguese warfare. Their discipline, training, and morale had been forged through the successful Oporto campaign and months of careful preparation. The force totalled approximately 20,000 men, carefully organised into divisions that balanced firepower with tactical flexibility. Each regiment carried traditions stretching back decades, with officers and men who understood their role in maintaining British military honour against Europe's most feared opponents. Supporting this infantry corps were artillery batteries equipped with the latest British ordnance and cavalry regiments, whose aggressive spirit had been demonstrated in previous peninsular actions. The entire force embodied Wellington's tactical philosophy, professional competence combined with adaptive leadership that could exploit any enemy weakness. The alliance with Spanish forces under General Gregorio Garcia de la Cuesta proved problematic from the outset. Cuesta commanded approximately 34,000 troops, giving the combined force apparent numerical superiority over local French garrisons. However, Spanish military organisation bore little resemblance to British professional standards. Cuesta himself epitomised the challenges Wellington faced in coalition warfare. At 65, the Spanish general was physically frail, politically obstinate, and deeply suspicious of British motives. His refusal to coordinate effectively with Wellington created dangerous gaps in planning, while his imperious attitude towards subordinates undermined operational effectiveness. More critically, Spanish promises of logistical support proved worthless. Wellington's army, advancing into hostile territory, depended entirely on Spanish authorities for food, ammunition, and medical supplies. These commitments were repeatedly broken or inadequately fulfilled, forcing British soldiers to operate on half rations while maintaining combat effectiveness. The cultural differences between British professional military culture and Spanish aristocratic military traditions created constant friction. Where Wellington emphasised careful planning, systematic preparation, and disciplined execution, Cuesta preferred grand gestures, personal honour, and improvised responses to tactical challenges. Despite these difficulties, Wellington recognised that Spanish cooperation offered the only realistic path to strategic success in the peninsula. Abandoning the alliance would mean retreating to defensive positions in Portugal, surrendering the initiative to French commanders who could then concentrate overwhelming force against isolated British positions. The march towards Madrid revealed the full scope of logistical challenges facing British forces operating beyond their established supply lines. Spanish promises of provisions proved consistently unreliable, forcing Wellington's army to advance while carrying minimal supplies and depending on uncertain local support. French defensive positions were stronger than intelligence had suggested, with veteran garrisons occupying key strongholds along the approach routes to Madrid. These forces, commanded by experienced officers, had learned to respect British tactical capabilities while adapting their own methods to peninsular conditions. Marshal Victor's Army of the Centre, numbering approximately 46,000 troops, represented a formidable obstacle to Wellington's advance. These weren't garrison troops, but active field forces with extensive combat experience across multiple European theatres. Their confidence stemmed from repeated victories using column tactics that had proven devastatingly effective against conventional opponents. The concentration of French forces near Talavera created exactly the situation Wellington had hoped to avoid, a major engagement where numerical disadvantage would test British tactical superiority against proven French methods. Retreat meant abandoning Spanish allies and accepting strategic failure, while advance risked destruction of Britain's only effective army in the peninsula. Wellington's decision to accept battle at Talavera reflected his confidence in British tactical methods, combined with careful analysis of terrain advantages that might offset numerical inferiority. The position offered defensive benefits while maintaining escape routes should the battle develop unfavourably. The first day's fighting, July 27th, provided ominous signs of coalition difficulties that would plague the entire engagement. Spanish troops demonstrated alarming lack of discipline when French dragoons approached their positions, firing a massive volley at targets well beyond effective range before significant numbers fled in panic. This Spanish panic, as British observers termed it, removed thousands of Allied troops from the battlefield before serious fighting began. Approximately 2,000 to 6,000 Spanish soldiers abandoned their positions, convinced by the thunder of their own muskets that they faced overwhelming enemy assault. Wellington watched this collapse with growing concern, recognising that his tactical plans now depended entirely on British troops holding positions originally intended for much larger combined forces. The mathematical disadvantage had become even more severe, while French commanders gained confidence from witnessing Allied disintegration. Spanish officers' inability to maintain unit cohesion under pressure confirmed Wellington's worst fears about coalition warfare. Professional armies required systematic training, consistent leadership, and mutual confidence that could only develop through shared hardship and success. Spanish forces possessed none of these qualities in sufficient measure. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate tactical consequences, as French troops observed Allied weakness, while British soldiers realised they faced the coming assault essentially alone. This isolation would test every aspect of Wellington's leadership and British military culture in the crucible of sustained combat. Wellington's response to Spanish collapse demonstrated the adaptive leadership that distinguished great commanders from merely competent ones. Rather than attempting to rally unreliable allies, he concentrated on maximising British tactical advantages through careful positioning and clear communication with his own subordinates. The morning of July 28th brought clear skies and scorching heat that would test the endurance of both armies throughout the coming engagement. French forces, organised in the massive columns that had conquered Europe, advanced with confidence, born from repeated victories against conventional opponents. Marshal Victor's tactical plan followed proven French doctrine. Artillery bombardment to weaken enemy positions, followed by column assault that would shatter defender morale through sheer psychological impact. French soldiers advanced screaming war cries designed to terrorise opponents before physical contact began. The columns themselves were impressive formations, dense masses of veteran troops organised for maximum shock effect. Each column contained approximately 1,600 men, arranged 9 ranks deep, creating psychological pressure through sheer visual impact while maintaining sufficient mass to overwhelm defensive positions through sustained assault. Against these formations, Wellington deployed the tactical innovation that would define British infantry doctrine for decades, the 2-rank line that maximised firepower while maintaining flexibility. Every soldier in the formation could fire simultaneously, creating devastating volleys that no column could withstand at close range. Wellington's use of reverse slope positions added another layer of tactical sophistication to British defensive arrangements. By positioning troops behind hill crests, he protected them from French artillery while concealing actual defensive strength until French columns committed to final assault. The Cerro de Medellin became the critical point where these opposing tactical philosophies would be tested under the most demanding conditions. French columns, exhausted from climbing steep slopes under artillery fire, reached the crest expecting to find demoralised defenders ready for quick defeat. Instead, they encountered perfectly disciplined British infantry lying concealed behind the military crest, weapons loaded and aimed, waiting for Wellington's command to rise and deliver coordinated volleys at point-blank range. The surprise was complete and devastating. The 29th Worcestershire Regiment exemplified British tactical excellence during this critical moment. As French columns approached the summit, breathing heavily from their climb and disorganised by artillery fire, the regiment rose as one and delivered a single, perfectly coordinated volley that shattered the lead French formation. Following immediately with bayonet charges, the 29th drove surviving French troops back down the slope in complete disorder. This combination of disciplined firepower and aggressive follow-up became the template for British infantry actions throughout the Peninsular Campaign and beyond. Similar scenes played out across British positions as regiment after regiment demonstrated the tactical superiority of disciplined lines over massive columns. French troops, expecting quick victory through shock assault, instead encountered the most professional infantry force in Europe at the height of their tactical effectiveness. The psychological reversal was as important as the physical defeat. French soldiers who had dominated European battlefields for over a decade suddenly found themselves outfought by enemies they had dismissed as mere shopkeepers. British confidence soared, while French morale began its historic decline. Artillery duels throughout the battle demonstrated the technical superiority of British gunnery combined with superior tactical deployment. British batteries, positioned to support infantry operations, provided exactly the fire support needed when French pressure threatened to overwhelm defensive positions. The effectiveness of British artillery reflected not just technical competence, but systematic coordination between combat arms that French forces couldn't match. Infantry commanders understood artillery capabilities, while gunners anticipated infantry needs, creating seamless cooperation under the most demanding conditions. French artillery, though numerous and well-served, suffered from tactical deployment that prioritised traditional bombardment over flexible support for column assaults. This rigid approach prevented effective adaptation when British tactical methods proved more effective than French planning had anticipated. Cavalry actions during the battle revealed both the strengths and limitations of British mounted forces operating in peninsular conditions. The 23rd Light Dragoons achieved spectacular success in charging isolated French formations while suffering severe casualties when pursuing defeated enemies beyond supporting distance. These mixed results reflected the aggressive spirit that characterised British cavalry culture, while highlighting the tactical discipline required for consistent success. Individual courage and unit élan needed careful direction to achieve maximum effectiveness without unnecessary losses. Wellington's management of cavalry operations demonstrated his understanding of mounted forces as tactical instruments rather than independent combat arms. Properly supported and carefully directed, British cavalry could achieve devastating results against appropriate targets under suitable conditions. The battle's climax came when sustained French pressure finally seemed to crack British defensive positions. Multiple column assaults, supported by concentrated artillery fire, created casualties that threatened to break even the most disciplined formations under such prolonged stress. At this critical moment, Wellington's personal leadership proved decisive. Moving along British lines under heavy fire, he provided exactly the reassurance needed to maintain unit cohesion, while adjusting tactical deployments to meet evolving French threats. The sight of their commander calmly directing operations while enemy fire swept the position inspired British soldiers to maintain discipline despite mounting casualties. This personal courage under fire became a hallmark of Wellington's leadership style throughout his peninsular campaigns. French attacks gradually lost momentum as casualties mounted and tactical success remained elusive. Column formations that should have overwhelmed British positions instead found themselves repeatedly repulsed by disciplined volleys and determined bayonet charges. By afternoon, French commanders recognised that their tactical methods were inadequate against British defensive excellence. Marshal Victor's forces had suffered approximately 7,000 casualties while achieving no significant territorial gains, forcing acknowledgement of tactical defeat. The aftermath of Talavera revealed both the extent of British tactical success and the strategic limitations that would characterise Wellington's peninsular campaigns. French forces retreated in disorder, abandoning equipment and supplies while British troops maintained perfect order despite their own severe casualties. Wellington's promotion to Viscount Talavera and Wellington recognised his achievement in defeating Napoleon's veterans under the most challenging conditions. The victory proved that French tactical superiority was not inevitable when opposed by professional competence and superior preparation. However, strategic realities quickly overshadowed tactical triumph as Marshal Soult's approach with 50,000 fresh troops threatened to cut Wellington's retreat routes. The mathematical impossibility of fighting multiple French armies simultaneously forced immediate withdrawal toward Portuguese territory. This retreat, conducted through scorching heat with inadequate supplies, tested British endurance as severely as the battle itself. Soldiers who had fought magnificently at Talavera now struggled through logistical nightmares that claimed more casualties than enemy action. The contrast between tactical excellence and strategic limitation defined Wellington's peninsular experience during this period. British forces could defeat any French army in direct confrontation while lacking sufficient strength to maintain territorial gains against multiple enemy concentrations. Wellington's response to these challenges shaped his tactical thinking for the remainder of the Peninsular Campaign. Future operations would depend on superior defensive positions, reliable supply lines, and tactical methods that maximised British advantages while minimising exposure to French strengths. The battle established tactical principles that would characterise British infantry doctrine throughout the 19th century. The two-rank line, supported by disciplined artillery and aggressive cavalry, proved superior to any opposing system when properly implemented by professional soldiers. More importantly, Talavera validated Wellington's leadership abilities against the most demanding test possible: major battle against veteran opponents under adverse conditions with unreliable allies. His performance during this crisis established the reputation that would eventually lead to command of the coalition forces that defeated Napoleon. The human cost of victory provided sobering context for tactical success, as British casualties totaled over 5,000 men, nearly 25% of Wellington's effective strength. These losses, though sustainable in military terms, represented irreplaceable professional soldiers whose training and experience could not be quickly replaced. French casualties, approaching 7,000, reflected the devastating effectiveness of British defensive tactics, while demonstrating the futility of column assaults against properly prepared positions. The mathematical exchange favoured defenders who could maintain their positions, while attackers exhausted themselves against disciplined resistance. Spanish casualties remained relatively light due to their early departure from serious combat, though this avoidance of losses came at the cost of military reputation and alliance credibility. Wellington's future planning would account for Spanish limitations rather than hoping for improvement through experience. Talavera's significance extends beyond immediate tactical results to its role in establishing British military credibility during the most critical phase of the Napoleonic Wars. The victory demonstrated that Napoleon's armies could be defeated by superior tactics and professional competence rather than mere numerical superiority. For British public opinion, the battle provided essential proof that continental intervention could achieve meaningful results. Parliamentary critics who questioned Peninsular commitment found their arguments undermined by undeniable tactical success against Europe's most feared military force. The engagement validated Wellington's tactical innovations while exposing strategic limitations that would influence his subsequent Peninsular campaigns. Future operations would depend on defensive advantages rather than offensive ambitions, recognizing the mathematical realities of fighting outnumbered against multiple enemy forces. Wellington's transformation from Sepoy General to European commander began at Talavera, where his tactical methods proved effective against the finest troops Napoleon could deploy. This reputation would grow through subsequent victories until he emerged as the coalition's most dangerous opponent. The battle's legacy lives on in British military tradition through regiments whose battle honours commemorate their Talavera service. The tactical principles demonstrated during the engagement continued influencing British military doctrine well into the 20th century. For the British Army, Talavera represented the moment when peninsular experience merged with professional competence to create tactical superiority over any European opponent. The confidence gained from this victory sustained British forces through the challenging campaigns that eventually drove French armies from Iberian soil. Wellington's personal development during the Talavera campaign established the leadership characteristics that would define his subsequent career. The combination of tactical innovation, personal courage, and adaptive leadership under pressure became hallmarks of his command style. Most significantly, the battle proved that individual excellence and professional competence could overcome numerical disadvantage when properly applied under competent leadership. This lesson resonated throughout British military culture, inspiring confidence in institutional superiority over mere numbers. The Battle of Talavera stands as testament to what British military professionalism could achieve under the most demanding conditions. Wellington's first great European victory established principles that would eventually triumph at Waterloo itself.